Call the Audit Committee meeting to order. Note that all committee members are present as well. 1, 2, 3. Oh, Tony. No, Tony's here. Who am I missing? Mike. Yes, sorry. Our full members are here. Our, what I call our reserve member is not yet present. You say, Heather, that he may not attend?
He had an appointment. He wasn't sure.
All right. And we have staff here, David Hewitt, we have Daniel, and we have Margaret from Finance Department, and Heather is taking notes. The agenda is in front of you. Can I have a
Motion to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? Aye. The minutes from the last meeting, do we have a motion to approve? Or any corrections, discussion?
Motion to approve. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
There are no members of the public present. Don't recall seeing anything in terms of a written public comment come in. Thank you, Heather. We will now move on to the discussion of the fiscal year 2021-2022 external audit report. Elsa, do you have anything you want to say before we go through and ask any questions we have?
I actually have the audit presentation pulled up. I had planned to go through that unless you prefer that I don't.
No, actually, I think that we would like to see that. Thank you.
Okay. Do you guys have that handy?
It's on our screen.
Okay, great. I can get started whenever you'd like me to.
Go ahead.
Okay. First slide. Martin Starnes and Associates would like to present the Town of Holden Beach's 2022 audited financial statements. Next slide. Some audit highlights. The town received an unmodified opinion, which is a clean audit opinion. I'd like to thank David, Daniel, and Margaret, as well as the rest of their staff for all their hard work on the audit this year. It's always a pleasure working with you all. Anytime we ask for information, it's given to us timely, and we greatly appreciate your assistance on the audit. Next slide. Fund balance. The LGC measures available fund balance by taking your total fund balance, less non-spendable items, less items restricted by state statute. The LGC uses this calculation to compare you to other units. Next slide. Your total fund balance for 2022 for the general fund was $4.5 million. You had stabilization by state statute of $622,000. This gives you an available fund balance calculation of $3.9 million. This is an increase in your available fund balance of $406,000. And this increase is due to overall increases in your total fund balance. Next slide. Available fund balance as a percent of expenditures for the general fund was 146.8%. This means that you have approximately 18 months worth of fund balance at the end of fiscal year 22 to cover your general fund expenditures. Excuse me. Next slide. Total fund balance for the general fund at fiscal year 22 was $4.5 million. This is an increase of $555,000. Revenues continue to exceed expenditures, which is the reason for this increase. Next slide. Revenues for the year were $4.1 million. This is an increase of about 7%. Expenditures increased by $9,000 up to $3.1 million, or 3.1 million. This is a change of less than 1%. I will detail these further along in the presentation. Next slide. Top three revenues for the general fund, you had property taxes at 69%, permits and fees 13%, other taxes and licenses were 9%, and other revenue was 9%. Next slide. Your property taxes were $2.8 million. This is an increase of about $63,000, about a 2% increase, but overall very comparable. Your tax collection rate was 99% at June 30. And then next slide. Other taxes and licenses were $360,000. This is about an increase of about 55%. This increase is due to increase in cost of goods. People are getting out and spending more as a result of COVID-19 slowing down. Next slide. Permits and fees were $546,000. This increase is due to parking fees. Next slide. Top three expenditures for the general fund. You had public safety at 45%, environmental protection at 9%, and general government at 30%, and then other expenditures were 16%. Next slide. General government expenditures were $925,000, an increase of about 6%, overall comparable to the prior year. Next slide. Public safety expenditures were $1.3 million. This is about a 2% increase, again, very comparable. Next slide. Environmental protection expenditures were $270,000, less than a 1% change there, comparable to prior year. Next slide. Quick ratio for the water and sewer fund. You had current assets of $2.1 million, current liabilities of $331,000, and this gives you a quick ratio of 6.43. The LGC would be concerned if this were less than 1, so you're in good shape here. And next slide. Performance indicator. This is your unrestricted cash over your total expenses, less depreciation, and adds in your debt service principal. The minimum required per the LGC is 16%, and you are at 50% this year. So all is good there as well. And next slide. This concludes my presentation. Does anyone have any questions for me?
I have a question not specifically about the slide, but you stated about the fund balance and we had 18 months. What is a benchmark? Do you know, Elsa?
The LGC prefers that you have at least, that you can cover at least 8 months worth of expenditures. So you guys are able to cover 18.
Does the town board have a policy on minimum fund balance?
Between 40 and 70%.
Can
Yes.
I ask why the water sewer quick ratio improved so drastically? I mean, it's wonderful that it's so positive, but I'm just wondering the background.
It looks like your current assets increased quite a bit. Let me pull the report up and see if I can tell.
David, while she's doing that, kind of get my apples and oranges together here. The town board's policy is 40 to 70%. Then what is 18 months? Is that 150%? What is it? Give me kind of the comparison there. If the fund balance town.
18 months is news to me.
Okay. A way of presenting it.
It's new.
Okay. Well, maybe she can help us get that consistent with. Is there a property tax revaluation in the plans? When does that kind of happen again?
We're going to get it soon.
This year? And is that, does the town board decide that, or is that statute driven? The county decides when they're going to do it?
The county decides the valuation.
Yes.
Before the commissioner.
But the process of reevaluating, who makes that, the county makes that decision?
The county has issued their first documents, starting to tell people this is coming.
Okay, I have an answer now. It looks like your cash increased quite a bit from last year to this year. I know part of that was restricted cash for your unspent debt proceeds, but your unrestricted cash went from 133,000 up to 1.6 million.
David, is
So
that a
that-
reflection of us borrowing money? Of us borrowing the money, or it's simply cash?
Did I have a question on the rental fees? How much have that gone up, say from,
Occupancy tax?
yes?
How much is it going up, or how much did it go up June 30th? It went up a
Yeah.
lot. I think it's addressed in the MD&A.
And let me get to what I was getting at. I noticed the public safety one there, that we were pretty flat with that, but I would think from pre-COVID days, we've gone up significantly. But yet the public safety one, which I guess is our police force and anything else we support. Yeah, I was just wondering if that should be going up in relationship to the increase in rentals.
Well, that's a revenue question. Okay, it's got a couple of pieces to it. Elsa, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, just a little bit. I think I can hear you okay.
Pre-COVID days, which is only a couple of years, we've seen the occupancy tax go from about $2 million, which is about the same amount of ad valorem tax, to almost $3 million, and then this year we're budgeting $3.2, I believe. So, we've seen the occupancy tax go up by a whole third again. Now, is that a function of more people at the beach? Probably, to some degree. Is it because people came to the beach during COVID and never left? Maybe. The bottom line is that to make the connection between the occupancy tax going up and the expenditures for public safety remaining static, that's a board's decision on the
And I know
service
that's
that they
outside
want
the
to
scope
provide.
of
I don't know
here,
if that's,
yours.
I don't know if I would draw the same correlation,
Okay.
that because occupancy tax goes up, you need to spend more on public safety, which is what I think I heard you say.
Yeah.
I did have a segue off of that. The safety percentage was 45%. I don't know if anybody knows a benchmark. I don't know if you know, Elsa, of our spend.
The safety was a percentage, I didn't hear that.
Right, in the slide deck, it was 45% of our expenditures. How does that compare to other townships?
You got me. That-
45%.
Yeah,
Right.
the
Maybe
45%
Elsa knows.
amongst other townships, I don't know, but that's been a static number for the history of Holden Beach. A lot of our expenses, when we see any variation, is not because we've seen a big plus up on anything. It's normally because we've bought vehicles that year. And, if we add one or two positions, it's not going to change the relative measure in the whole thing.
I think I can also answer to the why we had a modest increase in our public safety police department. We've gone through a year with 2 openings. So when we don't have openings, that salary amount of course, doesn't get used. It's just a matter of fact that if we can't find people, it's budgeted, but it doesn't get used. So it's not that the intent is not there. We need to fill positions.
Also, we had a question about your measurement of the fund balance being 18 months and the town board's policy of it being 40 to 70%. Can you kind of get us on the same measurement there? What does 18 months mean as a percentage?
Let's see here. Let me get back to that slide.
It was 145 something.
Okay. So we're really comparing your fund balance policy to what the LGC is looking at. The LGC is looking at your available fund balance, which is your total fund balance less your stabilization by state statute.
Divided by what? What do they divide that by to get a percentage?
8%. So you take the fund balance, the available fund balance divided by your total expenditures, and that's giving you 146.8% this year. So if you divide that number by 8, you get the 18 months worth of fund balance. And so the LGC considers that basically the 8% is 1 month's worth of fund balance. So you would have 18 months worth with your available fund balance. And they require at least 8%. They'll send a letter out if it reaches even close to probably 12% or so.
When was that policy, and as I recall, it was a target range. It wasn't actually a firm requirement, is my recollection. But when, that goes back at least?
Goes back to early in my time as a commissioner.
Yeah, like
so five
6 years ago.
probably.
And it's not been
Are you
revisited.
talking the 40 to 70%?
Yeah,
Yeah.
4 or 5
but
years?
it hasn't been discussed.
It has been mentioned occasionally at budget meetings, and the decision was to leave it at 40 to 70, and there has been a practice of looking to assign balance that's over 100% to beach and inlet, and that's at the board's discretion. As I recall, that's how we've been looking at it over the last couple years. But that's when it gets over 100%.
The general fund balance policy is flavored with the fact that we have this thing called the B-Part Fund. Other coastal communities actually run their occupancy tax inside of the general fund, which, in my opinion, bloats that ratio, because it's a function of revenues this year available to next year's expenses. If we counted our B-Part cash in our general fund, it would be ridiculously high. I mean, so that's why I believe that there's a recognition that there's this thing called B-Part that does provide some general type services, but, by definition, we really try to keep a real sharp corner on how that's accounted for, separate from the general fund. And then you have the whole discussion on how, choose for sand, choose for tourist-related issues, above and beyond being embedded in the people. I mean, in general.
Next.
I mean, this is a discussion, at the time, I think, before that policy was set, we were actually, in terms of the precise measurement that's in the audit report. We were below the 40%
Well,
level for.
Yeah, historically, the fund balance policy that existed before that, the board's policy, it was about 24%, I believe it was, and then after discussions with the local government commission, that number was basically their suggestion as being appropriate for Holden Beach. Once I forgot, that coach team visited with us. We talked through our books with them and explained how the B-Park Fund works. And then looking at other coastal communities, that was actually their suggestion on what it should be.
I've got a question. First of all, David and team, congratulations for great audit there. It's a nice job to all you guys. I noticed in the 3 write-ups here that they were looking at material deficiencies. And you came out clean in all those. Outside of the audit report, did they provide any sort of, hey, this would be nice to clean up or anything like that, or was it just totally clean?
When you say the 3 write-ups, you're including the single points in that collective too?
Yeah, well, the 3 at the end of this, the whole documentation.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Elsa, but I don't know if there was much left to say once we got to that. We worked hand in hand very closely with Elsa and her team, Maria, in getting through this year's audit, because this was a significant event for us, the staff here, with the FEMA audit. And matter of fact, I'll go ahead and put a plug in for next year, because the FEMA monies, there were some residuals that bled over past 30 June. So there probably, I believe, that there'll have to be another single point audit, but not as, the lion's share of the FEMA money has gone through our books, like a watermelon through a snake.
Was there a management letter this year, kind of like, we in the previous years, we'd seen kind of a standard management letter that came?
Elsa,
spelled
was
out
there?
No,
Yeah.
no, there was no management letter
And
this year.
is that normal practice, that there's not a management letter?
Yeah, it's good if there's not a management letter. A management letter would be if we had a recommendation that didn't quite reach the level of a finding, but we would have to provide that in writing.
So previously, it seemed like we'd looked at some internal control questions just because of the limited size of the staff. You can't do everything like an auditor would want you to. Is that
Right.
was that not something that was worthy of discussion this year?
We did not note any issues in our testing, our internal control testing.
Great.
I think for the size of your staff, you guys have good controls.
And there was some mention about parking fees in one of the revenue slides. I want to kind of understand exactly how that worked, because I know there's been a big change here. But the increase in the parking fees that will be reflected in this budget as of June 30th didn't reflect your parking policy. Did that go into effect in July? When did
No,
it-
it went into effect in May. So
Okay, so you did
yes,
have
there
some
was,
money.
there was revenue from the
Okay.
first couple months.
Okay.
So that just reflects the beginning of the season.
And is that money, how will that be kind of going forward? Is that in a fund by itself that you can see, these are the income, this is the expenses related to that project? How do you keep your arms around that going forward, not just right now?
Not only going forward, but in the few months that we did recognize it, it was categorized as on-street versus off-street parking, and then those spaces, and it was further refined whether those spaces were part of the B-Part Fund. In other words, places that had parking spaces where the capital asset is a B-Part asset.
Wow.
The pier,
Yeah.
okay, and then there's another parking lot that is a B-Part facility. So it's segregated a couple of ways.
Expenses as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That
Pat,
was-
I'm sorry, Pat, you could probably answer this, but on the parking, how did that match up to what y'all budgeted for?
We had a good year. Okay, again, I can't exactly answer the first 2 months, although I think it exceeded. But overall, I think the performance this year, it was above the expectations going into the year. And we'll have a discussion of that at a board meeting before the end of the year as we go over what happened and what we need to fine tune for next year. But this was a well-rolled-out program, and it performed well.
So the margin was positive?
I didn't hear.
Was the margin positive for the parking program?
Revenues versus expenses?
You got
Yes,
it.
ma'am. Surprisingly, there's not a lot of capital in parking. You know, it was painting lines and getting post and rope up. I had to spitball the number, expenses were probably in the $50,000 range, which is most of that's posts and signs. And that's probably a little bit high and I'm talking not just and those were all in this fiscal year in. So those upfront costs, but revenues that were collected far outpaced those, probably to the tune of about 4 to 1.
Elsa, I have a question on page 30 of the actual report.
Okay.
Again, I think I saw it last year too, something like this. We have restricted assets and you have canal dredging fund, and then you term it for beach renourishment. And that's for canal dredging. That is not a beach renourishment expense. And I think this is just a carryover that's been happening, but can we get that corrected?
Sure, let me see where that is again.
Page 30, restricted assets, canal dredging fund. You have the fund amount, and it is restricted because it's for canal dredging, but it's not for beach renourishment, it's for canal dredging.
Canal dredging, okay, yes, we'll get that fixed for next year.
And do we not consider that the beach and inlet management fund is restricted since it needs to be used for only specific expenditures, and it's under the control of the board? Or do we, because it's not given here.
Is it restricted by an external source?
It's a capital reserve fund that has been designated as for specific uses that the board passes approval on, so.
Not external funds.
That would be considered committed instead of restricted because it's committed by the board rather than an external source.
Okay, and in the business type activities, water and sewer, do those business type activities, again, do they include those capital reserve funds that we have because of development fees, or are those not part of this?
Those are not part of this.
Okay. Then I have a question on the restricted, how the restricted is looked at. On page 18, there are fund balances given for general fund, B part, ARP, canals, FEMA, et cetera. And those are multi-million-dollar values. But in terms of what is available to spend in an ongoing year, do you subtract the restricted from that fund balance number?
Can you remind me what page number this is again?
My page 18? Yeah, page 18, you have, it's, at the end, each one, you have fund balance. And you compare it beginning of the year and end of the year.
Yes.
But that fund balance is not all available, correct?
Correct.
So,
You can see that on the balance sheet. That'll be on your Exhibit C if you want to see your restrictions.
Yeah, that's what I meant, are these restrictions that you report on page 30, those are the values that you would subtract from the fund balance to get what I term available fund balance?
The only thing that that gets subtracted from available fund balance is the stabilization by state statute, which is separate from your restriction of your restricted cash. Your stabilization by state statute is basically your accounts receivable.
Okay. What I'm really trying to get at as we go forward is to understand, particularly in water and sewer, what available money is there as we look to go forward with the next lift station, hoping to get federal money for a good portion of it, and how much money do we have available that can keep us from having to borrow more than is necessary?
If you want to see that, that's on Exhibit G, which is page 22. Your net position for water and sewer, what is unrestricted is considered what is available. So it's 4.8 million.
Okay. When I was going through the report there, and I'm sorry, I didn't note the page, but I was looking at, I think, capital assets, town assets, and there was a land value there that from this year, last year, this year, didn't really, I don't think it changed. So the way that the accounting is done, I assume the purchases we made of land for B part, under B part, for the pier and Block Q, those are separate from the land asset value?
Let me see.
I'm not an accountant, so I'm just asking questions that,
They're in.
but they're in there, but they don't count towards land asset, which is a different line in that. And again, I apologize, I forgot to write the page down. Yeah.
They are included in infrastructure instead of land.
Okay, I just wondered why they're counted in infrastructure rather than land. It's page 39, I think, is where I...
Let's see. Yeah, I think I'm looking at the document that was provided to us. It said that the pier is considered to be infrastructure as well as Block Q. Typically, I'm trying to think. typically something like a pier would have to be maintained and
So, okay, maybe, is it, and maybe David can help, is land the various lots that we own in places that we have no?
don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Because we have plots of land that are, I consider to be sitting with no development plans. But Block Q and the pier, it is true the pier has structures on it. Block Q is a piece of land, plans are being developed, but it hit me as a question of why at least the Block Q at this point is not just considered land, because it has nothing on it. Whereas the pier, obviously, the pier property does have parking, a building, and a pier on it, but but Block Q has no such items at this point.
okay.
Was there ever
Well, we
any,
can, I'm sorry, you go ahead.
was there ever any breakout as to the portion that could be attributed to land only, or was it purchased as just one big,
It's land.
yeah, I
Block
think
Q
it's just,
is land.
yes. True, I understand that, but there was no delineation ever done to try to segregate the portion out that would be valued as land, huh?
You mean the pier or Block Q?
Either, I mean,
Well, again, Block Q is a piece of land that has not been put to plan yet. It
There's
has-
nothing on it.
Right, there's nothing on it. So, I can.
Well, there's a road.
Well, but that's not, it, which is going to be close. But there's a road, but I don't think the road is the full value of the piece of property. So it's property. So it just struck me as I was questioning why our land,
And I'll
Asset
correct myself
value.
on that. I'll correct myself on that. The road is not on Block Q.
correct, the road is, right. So again, I see the difference between the pier property and Block Q. And I still have the question of non-depreciable asset in terms of land, particularly for Block Q.
Yeah, I think we had been under the impression that it was more of like an infrastructure type asset rather than land, but we can always make that change if we need to going forward.
Again, I'm simply saying, at the moment, there is no formal plan for it. It was purchased with options for use, but there is no structure on it, and there is no formal plan for it. If that makes a difference in how it's assigned.
Okay. I'll have to discuss with the audit partner on that one.
Okay? On pages 37 and 38, these are listed as leases receivable, and there was a lease on use of a property, Brunswick Avenue, and use of a property for Rothschild Street. Are those both the water tower? Are those both the water tower? Are those both associated with the water tower? Because there's two of them.
Daniel, do you want to speak to that since you kind of worked with the Gatsby 87 stuff?
But they're just listed under two separate address. Okay. I think that's what confused me. Does anybody else have additional questions?
I just, as part of the the explanation of the general fund, there was a category around $300,000 of environmental. What exactly is that? Environmental something or other? Environmental protection?
It's an auditor question. That's an auditor question.
Okay.
Question.
What page is this on?
No, it was part of your presentation.
Oh, in the presentation. Okay. Let's see.
It was environmental something.
Solid waste, isn't it? It's solid waste.
Okay.
It might be other.
Yeah, okay, now,
Generally,
that makes sense.
it's solid.
That's
Yeah.
what it is, that's what it is.
Yep.
Is that in a question? Any, Elsa, this is the presentation the draft presentation that you're planning now to give at the November Board of Commissioners meeting, correct?
Correct.
Does anybody have any questions on that you think there might be consideration of clarification, since our public will see this and it helps if things are as clear as possible?
I just think when you present it, Elsa, I would give the benchmarks as you speak, so people can say, oh, well, then we're doing really well, you know, compared
Okay.
to LGC requirements. Like, we're asking those questions, what are the benchmarks? I'm sure the general public has the same concerns.
Sure.
Anything else? So also, you'll see to that one correction about the canal restricted is for canal dredging, not beach renourishment.
Yes.
And then, again, just go back and revisit the Block Q classification as infrastructure versus land. And again, I understand that is an auditor's decision, but we did have the question.
Sure. And let me ask you this, are there any, like, sidewalks on that property, or is it just land?
It's land, and the only current use of the land is right-of-way parking.
Okay, right-of-way parking. The parking, that may change the consideration. So I'll talk to the audit partner and get back with you guys.
Okay. I mean, if that's the simple explanation, that's fine.
Okay. All right. Well, is there anything else I can do for you guys today?
Before we let Elsa go, is there anything else, other than to thank you for working with the town so diligently?
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you guys for all your hard work too.
Okay, so we'll see you in a couple weeks,
Yes.
okay?
All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, the next part of this meeting is for us to discuss and try to prepare the audit committee report message, which we should give at the November Board of Commissioners meeting.
Does anybody have a copy of what we would have done previously?
I didn't bring last year. It was pretty basic. We presented the overview of, sorry, yes, David?
I had a curriculum on it.
Good.
I remember the answer to your question. That was the $1 million cash in the railroad tool fund. That was to pay back loan where we reimbursed ourselves.
That's what I meant when I said, was it borrowing?
It was,
Yeah.
that's what it was. We fronted that we borrowed. The money that we could get back would qualify.
That that makes more sense, because it doesn't say there's.
Yeah. We just didn't get it from rates.
Yeah, I'm sorry, because I wasn't clear when I said, was that from the borrowing? Because it
I
was
thinking
it was a
lift station.
payback.
I was thinking the next lift station.
It was payback borrowing that gave us that relief.
We were able to actually recoup some of the 760.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Last year, we pretty much presented, it was an unmodified opinion, there were no findings, and we compared the beginning of year and end of year fund balances, okay? And that was pretty much what we did. It was, I would just say it was a pretty simple year the year before. I don't know how much further we want to go this year. If we need to explain a little bit more, that reminding people that there have been purchases, reminding people that due to purchases, there has been increased debt, things like that, because I don't know how much we want to do beyond reporting the status of this report compared to what should be done during budget discussions and quarterly financial updates. And I don't believe that it's our job to remind the public about budget issues.
No, and so it's actually, I think our response is a fairly simple message, quite frankly, that, I don't know that it needs much more than a paragraph, that we have, reviewed the audit report and, it's.
I mean, the highlights on page 4 are the financial highlights were, last year, we drew from those. And we put fund balance information in relative to the beginning of the year and the end of the year, which is a table in this report. And we made the point in each case, we made the point on modified opinion, no material or significant deficiencies. This year, we would make it both for financial reporting and for the question of state and federal internal controls. It's all clean. I mean, that would be my basic proposal, that covers what the audit does and what the management discussion presents. I don't know if there'll be any confusion about, at the end of the current fiscal year, unassigned fund balance general fund was 83% of total general fund expenditures, which is true, against whether a question will come up about the 145% of the calculated. That always causes confusion. No, it does always cause confusion, you know that.
I got something to say there. I would hope that the audit committee would take the opportunity to put something in their report to the commissioner that speaks to the extreme success that the FEMA project that we had with it. Because it's one thing to have an audit, but it's another thing to run the $25 million through our books and go through the scrutiny of another layer of the single point federal audit on top of that without one single issue. And it was 100% sample. Every single transaction on that FEMA stuff was sampled by the nature of the process every single one of those things the same. And, I don't want that to be lost. I know that we put the sand down and we got the money and everything's great. But underneath that layer of ice, there's a whole lot of river flowing underneath that to make that happen. And that was a big deal.
No.
Not only the project, but also to make sure that those processes comply with the uniform guidance that was part and parcel of Elsa being able to say that our internal controls were
And that is what I meant by, in addition to the financial reporting, there is in the Martin Starnes report,
Yeah,
which we
and
received.
unfortunately, it's the very last page with micro print on the
Well,
back
no,
of
no,
it.
no, no, no.
That talks about how that is. All the juicy stuff is up front, and it says we did real good and everything, but the big piece of it, and it's not the most important thing in y'all's report or in this audit, but I'm just putting a foot forward so that it doesn't get, it's an anomaly.
Well-
This single point audit is an anomaly. We're not used to running that type of federal loan to us, and it's going to, hopefully it's an issue that is a recurring issue, especially with some of our congressionally funded earmarks that we're hoping to score
Mhm.
in the upcoming year.
I
Hope
haven't.
that it's a repetitive issue.
No,
But
I-
this being the first one out of the gate, it's a major problem.
David, my notes to myself about auditor's report were to make note both for, again, financial reporting, but, so on page 90, financial statements. Financial statements where, there are no material weaknesses identified, none reported, but then federal awards and state awards, it was my intent to have both of those mentioned in paragraphs to make it clear that in both cases, both just the financial statements and then state and federal awards were clean. And that these federal and state are not annually, they are dependent on the size of the grant. And these are not things that we annually do, so to be clean is an accomplishment.
And not only clean, but within the time frame that up until last year had never been achieved of completing these things, and technically within the statutory required time frame, even though there's generally extra days required, I know we've discussed, but I think it's accommodating to both staff and to the firm that assisted in that completion and their cooperation along the way to probably modify schedules and the like to accommodate us. So I think it's proved to be a pretty successful union, I think, over the last couple of years.
And I have to say, as a commissioner and knowing how much was going on in the year and how many things were getting done and then maybe we won't do it, getting done, maybe we won't do it, I think the fact that we somehow managed to come out with everything accurate is a really great thing. It really does show the diligence of the staff in the bookkeeping, and again, I think that the cooperation has been great.
So how do we get to where we need to be?
We have to.
Want to make a list of these bullets we want to put in a report, or?
Well,
how do
if we do that, and then you will simply let me write it, I will write it.
Okay.
And with that, but if we choose to use the basically the manager's highlights that are on page 4, there's 4 of them. If we then say that we will also include, as we did last year, the fund balance information that's in the table on page 18, that gives you as of the beginning of the fiscal year and the end, and then
I would
make...
just make reference to the town's policy, if you're going to get in those kind of details in it and add any new information to it, say, this is the fund balance, this is your policy, because she didn't have that in her report, so that's a good thing for the board to hear. And then
Well, we were just showing numbers here. I mean, actual values, that's what we did last year. But if we do fund balance against what the requirement is, we can do that. I mean, I can make a point of the general fund,
Well, I think it's
our
a question we
policy,
asked.
so we can do the policy. And then remind them of the policy, which is 40 to 70%, and we are
Twice.
146.5%. I'm glad you said you were surprised by that, because I was too, that it was quite that high, but that's good. And then to finish it with the description of the, both the financial reporting and the grants. Our unmodified opinion, no material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies, and that for the federal and state programs, the single point audit is not an annual event. So for this to be, for these findings to be so clean is a true reflection of the strength of our financial department.
Sounds like a plan.
Is that good? David, is that? It's not that as you go through the audit, if you're not an accountant, you don't sit and say, I wonder why this is, I wonder why this is. But generally, if you keep reading, you'll find it later, and it explains itself. Okay, so if everybody agrees, I will use those points, and I will write the report that we will give to the commissioners at the November meeting.
You'll share that with us, right?
I will give it to Heather to share with you.
Couldn't make any changes to it once you're out of the public meeting.
That's the thing is, once,
But I'd be happy to just share.
Be happy to read it.
yeah,
If we can
no,
do
no,
that.
before,
We
you
can
mean
do that.
before the meeting,
Thank you.
yes. Yeah, that's the problem, once we're out of this meeting,
I understand.
yeah, but yes, Heather, I can write it, and Heather can send it to you in advance.
And how do we correspond if there are any recommended changes?
You guys would have to call a special meeting.
Yes.
To make any changes.
That's the only way to do it. And I have to provide this to Heather,
Friday.
yes, Friday, the 4th, which means I have to do it by Wednesday, the 2nd, since I'm in a conference in Wilmington on Thursday, Friday. So I will be writing it tomorrow. But Heather is correct. If there is anything that you dislike about it that is significant, you'll need to say something, and then we can always withdraw it from the November report if we cannot address it in a special meeting. But BOCM is the 15th. Okay? Anything more on that? Okay, then if we could discuss, and Mark had asked for this to be put on the agenda last time, and Tony still had his
amazing.
his sheet. This was a template developed by, under a previous request from a board, and as I understood it, it had to do with a simple one-page financial report. I'm not clear whether the point was that this was part of the monthly report that's posted, or if it is a quarterly summary that can be useful when the town presents information. Can somebody remind me of that? Because this predated me.
Well, I think it was actually, it was a tool proposed for discussion for this audit committee. So when they would meet periodically and look at lengthy financial statements, just looking for a way that would maybe allow us to focus quickly on anything that might be substantially different than budget. So it wasn't meant to be anything
Okay.
more than that, other than a tool for the committee to say, okay, we're meeting in July or May, whenever, and now we can look really quickly by the funds and kind of see where there might be some deviations that we'd want to focus our questions on versus kind of the pot shot. We were just looking through, you know, a 20-page document looking for a particular line item that might look a little bit weird.
However, as I recall, when we rewrote our remit, we are not responsible for reviewing the financial monthly information. That is not part of our remit anymore, correct?
Well,
Yeah.
this is how you read the words.
I guess,
We certainly have
Even-
we have certainly narrowed the scope
I
since
think,
this was
I think
discussed.
the complexity of the full financial package that comes out of the monthly report is, to us who are more familiar with going through financial numbers, we found it complex, but to the community at large, and particularly to commissioners as well, to make it information more accessible to them, we thought it could have been a tool a reporting tool that might be beneficial to the public.
I would agree with that something like this on a quarterly basis for the commissioners and the public would be useful. I know I myself do go through the monthly report every month, and it is painful. And I have to refer back to my notes from the budget cycle to refresh myself on why certain things are and where we are. I don't know that every commissioner does that, and I am pretty sure there are very few of our owners who do it either. So I would agree a simplified something that is provided on a quarterly basis, perhaps in conjunction with the Finance Department quarterly update to the Board of Commissioners, could be useful. And the question is this consolidated and clear enough? Now, to me it is, but again, I go through the entire budget.
Well, I have a question as far as who should be doing this too, because this is somebody taking the information that's coming out of finance and reformatting it, basically. And who's checking over that person? Because you get one number wrong in there, and it could significantly
Well-
change this. You're taking spreadsheets that are in David's and team's possession and starting from scratch unless you're going to access that stuff, which I don't think we should be doing.
This would not be generated by a body outside of the Finance Department. That would be
Yeah.
that would just be asking for trouble. Something like this would have to come out of the Finance Department at the request of the Board of Commissioners for a format for a quarterly update. Okay, we can't have different bodies manipulating systems and numbers. That's how errors get made, and we are not here to duplicate the Finance Department.
Interject one thing. Can I stop and go back, and then we can come back to this? Go down to the very end of the thing about the third report that you were working on. We have done that, Tony. We actually we went in and did a little recalibrating on our software, and we're able to do that now.
Great.
Our runs now include regional budget.
Great.
Budget, and, that was Commissioner Fikowski's suggestion to the board, and we're able to get it done for this year. I digress, sorry.
So, again, particularly the statement of funds fiscal year, the first sheet. On a quarterly basis, how much effort would this be from the finance department to generate something like this?
Well, is there a question about whether this committee needs it? Because it's not really in our purview.
No.
If we don't need it.
It would be whether or not to put it forth to the commissioners. Would they like to see something like this?
Well, I think that's a commissioner discussion. I mean, what's our dog in that fight if we're not going to
Well,
look at it?
it's not a dog in the fight, but here's what's going to happen if you go to the board and say, would you like to see something simplified for,
I don't think we're necessarily going to go to the board with that.
but
unless we're gonna
their
use it
question will
ourselves.
be, what are you proposing? Because they won't have an idea.
Are we proposing anything? I mean, I was under the impression this would be something we would use. If that's not part of our purview, I don't know why we would be speaking about it in general. Is that part of our purview to review the financials on a quarterly basis? Sounds like it might not be.
It is
which is
not,
fine.
we took it out.
Okay.
The question then becomes, is it worthwhile for the finance department to say, we were working on something that is not our purview now, we think it might have value for the board? Would the board like to consider whether this could be useful to them, getting as a quarterly summary, which, again, there is already a summary, a brief summary given, but this standardizes it. If you don't give the board an example, I don't think they will have an opinion.
Well, isn't that what you just said, though, that they're getting a report every quarter?
We do
a
not,
summary?
okay, you aren't, I don't think you're watching the, necessarily the reports that are given at the quarterly. David gives a very brief summary of a few numbers. It is a real 4 or 5 slide overview. I am asking whether this is, I would ask the board if this would be useful to them as a more comprehensive, not just the board, but if the public would also like it. Does it enable them to understand without going through every sheet of the budget report, of the budget report?
I would think you'd ask the commissioners that. I mean, that's the body you're acting, isn't it? You want to ask them if they want more information in the quarterly reports that y'all discuss?
I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to use this as an example. This is not that different from things I used that I had put in front of me in industry. So I'm happy to ask them if they would like a more detailed quarterly report.
Well, you know, this report was crafted at a different time on the audit committee at the direction of a different leadership of the audit committee at that time. If this is not, I mean, and I have no pride of ownership, all I did was move the
I know.
numbers around. If this is not something that we believe the audit committee has a responsibility for or interest in, then I'd say, why would we even get involved with that?
Well,
If that's something y'all want to do, fine.
But what I recall, and this is going back quite a few years, that the question was made to the board whether or not they might be interested, and this is a previous board. And the previous board didn't shoot it down. Now, just because we move forward with new boards, unless there is a deliberate decision to stop an activity.
Well, I think when you change the scope of the responsibilities of the audit committee, which I support wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
But I think when our scope was more narrowed down to, as articulated in this ordinance that we passed, I think in some ways that perhaps cleared some misunderstanding about exactly what role we were supposed to play in the process and eliminated that level of oversight from our responsibilities.
It
And if did
eliminated,
that, then
it
I would say it
eliminated
makes it
us
moot.
being responsible for reviewing the data. The piece that I recall was it could be useful to the board as well to have something standard. This is something standard. Whoever reviews it, this would be something standard. So that's all I'm saying. If this finance committee, if this audit committee sorry, if this audit committee doesn't believe that this really is a good overview that could help the public and the board, then we shouldn't raise the topic. If this audit committee does believe it brings value in simplifying, looking at the financials on a quarterly basis, rather than having to go through every page of the report and try to go back to your notes and things, then, you know, if it doesn't help on that, then we shouldn't. We should just drop it. So, to me, it's a question of whether or not the audit committee thinks this could bring value and understanding for the public and the board.
Well, let's-
Simple as that.
Can I just make one more point? David, does the staff in its existing today have the capability to generate such a summarized report within their own means? Do you have a report writing capability within the system, or do they have an understanding of how templates and how to maintain them?
I'd probably ask for Mr. Schiavone's spreadsheet in order to manually recreate an updated version of this. So, I mean, it's replowing, you know, it's
Okay, so that-
reconfiguring
So in other words, you
existing
have-
information.
You have, what was this through Excel? So you have existing capability of using Excel within the department and the like?
But not to automatically generate this report.
Okay.
There'd have to be a manual
Understood.
transfer of keying data in, unless there was some type of macro written to export and import
Uh-huh.
straight to you.
You add and
Do that
delete
for 'em.
accounts and the like, you have to maintain the integrity of the report.
Can I ask, is the actual column and the budget column, are they the same number of months when we're comparing? Or is the budget always the fixed 12 months?
It's the 12 months. They don't spread the budget. It's annual number. This happened to be 11 months, I think, so it's kind of close, but
To me, that is confusing. If I were a public person, you'd have to spell it out. Hey, our budget is 12 months, you're comparing the actual, which is 11 months. It would be easier, like our job, the CPAs, is to provide information that is easily understandable by their end user and informative. And I'm just, for argument's sake, it would be more informative for the end user if both of those columns are the same time periods. But if it's a governmental thing that you always have to present 12 months, then it's a moot point. We just have to spell it out. This is 12 months, this is 11 months.
I'm not sure, David, do y'all even keep a monthly budget, or is it just the annual rate? I don't think they really even keep a monthly budget.
Yeah.
They just always compare percentage kind of against the actual numbers.
Okay.
Yeah, the revenue line particularly is way out of whack in the
Right.
early months of the fiscal year, and then all of a sudden kaboom, then it's way ahead, and over December, January, I assume.
Our revenue lines look like a DNA. You got one up, one's up, the other one's down, and then what do they call that?
But most expenses
Asymptotic.
tend to run pretty, well, I guess not. I guess you still have a lot of summertime expenses that increase proportionally with, so there are period issues and the like too, but.
That's why it's probably confusing. You give this to the public though,
That's why
and
I'm-
looking at these,
You'd be
to
confused.
actual to budget, boy, a lot of hands would be coming up and go, why are we at minus 90% of budget?
Well, of course, if they look at the sheets in the system, it's there. If you.
Right, but that's gonna bring up the question for.
That's why does this bring value to help the commissioners and the public better understand the situation?
You know, if a citizen wants to get more engrossed into the budgeting process, they have the opportunity to participate in the budget meetings, which, quite frankly, are more revealing, to me at least, as an outsider, than plodding through those detailed monthly reports or even these summaries because it explains timing issues and the like. You discuss fund balance. Are we going to raise taxes, lower taxes, keep taxes the same? I mean, those discussions are pretty prominent in that period. There's unfortunately very little public attendance to those things, but
I got a feeling this
I-
year's gonna be a little different.
Probably. There's a lot more going on.
yeah.
So,
The revalue.
Yeah, I guess when I brought this up last meeting, I just didn't want this thing to, I think it just sort of died a sudden death, and I don't know how it died, but it did, and I just wanted Tony's diligence at least to get one final check. And I think the points have been made, and I've been satisfied that maybe we have no more role in this process, at least at the present order from the commissioners. So I consider, at least from my perspective, this subject drawn unless someone externally brings this up. So maybe since I'm the one that added this to the agenda, I should be the one to recommend that I think that it's no longer our role in this committee to either recommend or I don't know how I withdraw my request. But
well,
I think,
the decision on updating and forwarding example templates to the Board of Commissioners for their consideration, do I understand that there is consensus that we do not believe forwarding these for their consideration should be done? Is that consensus?
well, that's a motion, I think we
That's-
can make that a motion that I make.
Then you would move that we do not forward the templates to the board for their consideration?
Yes.
Okay. Motion on the table? Do I have a second?
Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Unanimous. Any other business? What I had is sketched into my calendar. I had that we were supposed to try to maintain some availability in the first couple weeks of December. And my guess is, well, that's what I have on my calendar, and I'm thinking that we were going to have a discussion of how to move forward for next year's audit firm.
It's re-up.
Correct. Now,
Because I'm going, why would we need December now?
yes, now,
Because of the timing.
correct. So, you know, I remember that in December at the board meeting, I think it happens in December, there will be a decision on who in the Board of Commissioners will represent the board on this committee. Doesn't that happen in December, or does it happen in January?
I feel like it's January, but
Yeah,
I could be wrong.
I think we wanted to have it in December because it was at least clear that the current board is the current board. There won't be a different commissioner sitting here. But we could equally do it before the board meeting in January. The January board meeting will be the 17th. We would have to do it by Friday, the 6th, in order to give have a discussion and recommendation to the board through the packet by Heather's deadline. If we're,
Help me out.
yeah,
We're in year 3 of
yes,
March.
yes, I believe.
Yes,
Yes,
this-
this was 3.
Yeah,
This was 3.
So,
You automatically have, don't you automatically have to get it?
Well, they could withdraw,
you-
I assume they could
our
elect.
contract with them is up.
Yes.
Yeah, you can.
So, we even need
When was
We're
the,
gonna have to get we're going to have to obtain the services of an audit firm for fiscal year ending June 30. The board has opted in the past to do audit. So that, they don't have to do that for administrative services. The board does not have to, like for engineers and architects, you pretty much have to, but not for administrative services. Now, I don't know what the board is going to do.
Okay.
But I can tell you that after having become very familiar with our process, especially with single thing audit stuff, if David gets a vote, David's going to say, we would sure like to take advantage of all the time, effort, and knowledge.
Is there an LGC
Why?
policy guidelines on audit, changing auditors? Is there any kind of respect?
You know, when you ask the question, they say, it's always a good practice to review.
However, there is no stipulation that you must change after 3 years, and that's clearly written. I agree with what the town manager is saying, that given that we're going to have another audit on the FEMA, it will be continuing off this year, understanding of this year. It would be
It's gonna be-
inefficient to change
It's go-
this year. It would be very inefficient to change this year. The question to me would be, do you propose to the board to reissue a 3-year contract?
this,
Or
by the
do-
way, I think this upcoming year is the third year.
I think this is,
No, this was only the second year, I think.
Okay.
I'm,
That's
I'm,
why it's a question.
I'm
I can't
almost
remember.
positive that, because the audit committee, 2 years ago, I remember sitting through and going through the process of,
is Heather looking that up?
and so, because last year, I recall we had a meeting in December, January, whenever, that just routinely said, wait a minute, this is the second year, they've already given us a quote for that. And they had a quote for a third year as well. It's a slightly higher rate and the like. And so I don't think this, I'm pretty sure that this upcoming 2023 would have been the third year of their audit.
They did 19, 20, 2021, and 22, 23.
We're
This
done.
is,
We're done with them?
This is-
Okay,
yeah,
I stand
that-
corrected then.
that, I
Well,
was,
the easy way to do it, of course, is to have to I don't know what we're going to get to put it back in.
right.
They may not be interested in it.
Yeah, I think that it's fairly routine that, and I guess then we have a
Well-
prior review process that we can just
It's,
redo.
it's a simple enough decision that we wouldn't have to have another meeting to decide to remind the board that this is the last year of this contract and that we should send out an RFP for audit services as soon as possible.
Get it done early so they can respond to it. The
Mhm.
same, less than most people are in the governmental audit business now, but
Correct. So,
it's part and parcel of many firms, or many local governments not getting audits done on time. People still resort to about a year.
so we don't have to have another meeting if this board agrees that we should forward to the Board of Commissioners the recommendation that they, since this contract is over, that they send out an RFP as soon as possible for audit services.
I'll make that motion. I think that's a good idea.
I get that, and it's totally appropriate to do that.
No,
Because the contract's over, we need one.
no, but I don't think the board will say, it's only 2 weeks,
Right.
right? It's 2 weeks?
Yes.
So we don't have to meet again if you've made a motion.
I second.
Are we all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Is that motion clear, Heather?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then what it would be is when you meet next, and sometime in January, you should be in an evaluation process.
Correct.
Right. So,
Okay?
what's that? I'm sorry.
No, because,
I'm just trying to think through to make sure
Well,
that I'm.
and I was as confused as Mark whether it was, I thought it was 3, and then when he said 2.
Yeah, I thought it was 2.
Okay,
I'm getting older.
okay. So we will recommend, would, correct. So, we will solicit, I guess we will solicit calendar availability for January to have a meeting. It will, I think it will be after the 17th, because it should be after the board appoints the commissioner who will be on this committee. I think it needs to be after the 17th, because on the 17th, the Board of Commissioners will vote which commissioner will be appointed to the Audit Committee. We get appointed yearly. These guys are here for a while, but the commissioner gets appointed annually.
So
It would
basically
get all of the bids in, all of the responses in, so that the board can, so that this committee can review them and evaluate them for a decision either the week of the 23rd or the 30th. Yeah, because again, whoever the board assigns to this committee will be appointed the 17th.
With whoever the board assigns to the committee, if that necessarily means that the board is going to be, the board member is going to be chair of the committee. Right.
No, I know, but I think that the ongoing board, it should be the board moving forward in 23 that makes the decision, not the board that has been 22. And the thing is, again, if we were going to meet to be able to make a formal recommendation to the board, we have to have that written up and given to Heather by the 6th of January. And I just question whether or not this board can get together the week of the 1st. It's the holidays wreak havoc, you know that. So that's why I'm saying, I think it's best to be after the Board of Commissioners meeting on the 17th. Because then we would be preparing a recommendation that could go to the Board of Commissioners unless we called a special meeting specifically to address it. Unless the Board of Commissioners called a special meeting specifically to address it. I don't see how it works well with this group's, because of the holidays. Because of the holidays. You're looking at the week of the 21st, 28th are basically gone. We meet on Mondays or Fridays to accommodate people, and, well, again, we could always call a special meeting as the Board of Commissioners to take up the recommendation. I just don't see a physical way of getting people together to do it because of the way the holidays are running, David. Yeah, I understand what your concern is. I would simply say that we target getting the recommendation done before the end of January, and we'll send out a call out for availability And after that, sorry, Tony. Yeah. And then we can, as a Board of Commissioners, we can call a special meeting to expedite the decision. I don't have a better way of doing it because of the holidays.
They may not want to come back to work.
I don't think that, I don't think that'll be a problem. I don't think, and we have to have at least 2 responses, correct, on an RFP? Isn't it 2? RFQ is different, but isn't the RFP,
We have to have at least, I'm sure, a certain number of solicitations.
Yeah,
Don't you know?
You don't even have to solicit. Should you do so, there's not any, North Carolina statute that defines that contract.
okay. Is there any other business? Does staff have anything they want to add? It'll have to be after, we're not gonna have to meet in December because the December discussion was going to be about the contract. So we've made the decision to go to the board already. The audit committee is going to recommend to the board that they put out the RFPs, yes, at the November meeting. And then Heather will ask the audit committee their availability for the weeks of January 23rd and 30th for us to evaluate the responses and make a recommendation for the board.
Do trial balances.
I think it's as fast as we can do it. Okay? If there's no other business, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.